Hi, Tea Leaves here. I am going to read Cracking the Brain Code Functionally. This is the functional version. There's two. One's the emotional version. Let's put it this way. The emotional version is 20 pages long. The functional version is 7. So, we're going to go with the first one, or we're going to go with the functional version. And my foreword, someone wise once said, keep it simple, stupid. And this is my attempt to do that. I am not a seasoned author, nor do I intend to become one. I came across this theory and realized that it might help people. I did not include as many examples as version 2 has, because I tried to keep things short and sweet. Yes, I realize that some of this is already going to sound familiar, but gotta start somewhere, and where better than the beginning. This theory will not replace traditional psychology, but my hope is that it will work alongside of it. We believe in our brain. It's complex, and it is, but its complexity is actually simple to understand once you understand the basics. I will warn you, it does take a while to grasp the inner workings, though, because whereas you know how you yourself works, what makes sense to you and what feels right, but now you have to learn how the other half lives. And once you do that, you won't believe how they connect together and make sense of each other. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, the other half is actually your other half. So, this is basically the rough draft, but it's also maybe the finished copy. I'm not really sure. It all depends. Do I need to go any further? Do I need to fix this? Well, if anybody's going to read it, then maybe there's a need to do so. But if no one's going to read it, then it's kind of a waste of time, isn't it? Time, effort, money, because it does cost money to print out the papers. Anyway, so I wasn't going to include this in this version, but I did in the other one, so I'll include it here. I'll just run through it faster. The first things to ever make sense to your brain is life, death, and sex. They are our origins, and they are how we continue, and most importantly, as I said, they are the first things to ever make sense to the brain. I say that not necessarily consciously, but instinctively. This is important because, among other reasons, I suspect it's perhaps why some people having mental issues tend to have thoughts, dreams, and intrusive thoughts involving death and sex. The stronger the need is to make sense of something, the darker, the more aggressive, and the more deviant the thoughts, dreams, and intrusive thoughts can become. This happens because the brain, desperate to find answers, is using the first things that ever made sense to it. Little tiny words. Find those answers, helping you to find those answers. You see, we often use these things that already make sense to make sense of things that do not make sense. We all do that, right? We use something that makes sense to us in order to take something that doesn't make sense. Yeah, you get it. This seems extreme, but it's not as extreme as you think. And if you think you're one of those people, you can tell because, okay, I'm not going to include that part. I'm sorry. But I will say that oftentimes people who are especially in negative mental situations, they think about suicide, right? Because they think of suicide as possibly being an answer. So even though you're not really supposed to use death, life, and sex to answer questions, the brain is going to do that when it's kind of like frantic to find an answer. You know, I've tried this way, I've tried that way, I've tried this, I've tried all these different things and nothing's working. So then the brain goes back to the very first things that ever made sense to it and uses those to try and make sense of things. Which is why people think suicide is the answer. Sometimes. And even when oftentimes they think suicide's the answer and they don't actually use that answer, that doesn't mean the brain doesn't still go there as a possible thought in a lot of us. So, also on the subject of life and death, before you think ooh positive or boo negative, that's not how your brain looks at it. They are neither positive or negative. They are neither good or bad. They are simply processes. Often things we think are good or bad in the brain are really just processes. The brain realizes the importance of good and bad. For example, depression is just a process and it's a helpful one, but we'll get into that later. Yes, it actually says that on here. You have to forgive me because I didn't realize it until I read it later that I used double negatives. I didn't mean I didn't even know specifically what a double negative was until I looked at it, and I thought, I'll bet you that's a double negative. Because I said originally, and it said it's not, they are neither positive nor negative. Double negative. Okay. Anyway, sorry. For now, on with the reason why we're here. There are two sides to the brain, the emotional and the functional. Both sides can work forward as well as they can work backwards. There are primary definitions to both sides. These primary definitions are, I believe, the same for everyone. However, the strengths are not the same for everyone. There are also secondary definitions, but they are not the same for everyone. The best way I can think of to explain this is that the brain, of its own volition, I have no clue how or why it does this, picks and chooses the definitions that make sense as well as feel good to it. This is based on nature and nurture. The definitions can change, but there has to be a better, makes more sense reason for that change. A definition changing can be a good thing or can be a bad thing. So when I say the definitions can change, I'm talking about like the who you are inside. It's not something that usually changes. If you are the talkative type, then you are supposed to kind of stay that talkative type. If you're the more quiet type, then you're kind of supposed to stay the quiet type. And yet we've seen how people have actually changed, right? So in some cases, the definitions can change, and it's not the worst thing in the world, but in some cases, when they change, it's not a good thing. And it's not necessarily, it's what causes the definition to change. But we'll get into that later. Sorry. Sorry, I probably shouldn't have read this out loud like this. So below are the definitions of the two sides. And not all the definitions are listed. I'm not going to go into all of them. Including, and as well as I've excluded definitions that are crossovers, meaning they can actually be used by both sides equally. An example of this is like communication. And I will speak more on that perhaps in a future publication. And I'll go ahead and say it since I'm here now. But communication, it's, do we need to communicate? Need to communicate. Do we have to speak to do that? See, because there are different ways to communicate, that actually makes emotional, or communication becomes emotional at that point, because there are options. There's not one way only. So you could say that it is emotional. However, communication is a need in a lot of ways. It very much so simplifies things. Instead of just pointing at things, it does simplify by being able to use words. So, but we'll go into that more later. Just wanted to give you a quick example. Anyway, the functional definitions are need, things making sense, our safety/survival, the need to know what to expect, extremely important, the what is right here, right now, memory, focus, selfishness, reality, numbers, facts, truth, and law. That's just a few. Those are the more important definitions, we'll say. The emotional definitions are want, things feeling good, freedom, the what if, imagination, the roll with it, nonsense, and selflessness. So, the strength and the weakness of the two sides is determined by the nature of an individual. I believe the average is between 40 and 60%, meaning if you are 45% functional and you are 55% emotional, then your brain uses your emotional side, or its definitions for it, just a little bit more than the functional side. Excuse me. Now, as you can see, those numbers are also fairly close to the 50-50. So almost half and half. And this means that person uses both sides almost half and half. Just slightly more on one side. There are people who are percentage-wise above average. The percentage is, I'm going to guess, around 70%. I do not believe that it goes much higher than that, because we do need adequate amounts from both sides of our brain in order to live. The information above is based on a balanced brain, by the way. This includes the average percentages as well, because yes, some people who are above average, they're a lot more noticeable than people who are closer to the 50-50. People who are closer to the 50-50, you kind of really have to squint your eyes at them a little bit to kind of figure out which side they're using and to what degree why. I can do it. It's not perfect, especially the closer to the 50-50. And unless there's actually an imbalance or some issue happening, I don't worry about focusing on it, personally. But people who are above average, you can really tell because they're real sticklers for the law. They're real focused. Their actions sometimes seem very selfish, very one-sided. Or you have the other side, which is they don't really think very much. You know, sorry to use the old cliche, you're pretty but you don't think very much kind of thinking. They're very dreamy. They're very they're creative, but they don't have a whole lot of reasoning behind it. You know, they just do things. They just la la la. Anyway, that's just to give you an example. But I'll continue anyway, because that's, yeah. Sorry, I'm in a parking lot. I just got out of the doctor's office. Last appointment. And there's still a person sitting over there. Their truck drove around like twice in the parking lot when I came out. And then they parked. Now they're just sitting. What are they doing? Sorry. Anyway, okay. An imbalance, especially a stuck imbalance, can cause an average person to become above average. Unfortunately, this is not natural, and so it works against them. I just realized I don't think yeah, I did. Okay. For example, most average people are law-abiding. Someone whom is above average might also be law-abiding, but because of that extra percentage, they might also be a bit of a stickler for the law, including being a little pushy about it on other people. You know, those people who say, you know, oh, you should do this. This is the law. And you're like, I'm cool. I'm in my own space. I'll make my own decisions. I'm great. Right? Yeah. Both these examples are actually normal. So there's people who are law-abiding, and then there are people who are really law-abiding, kind of shove it on you, like, yeah, you should be paying attention to the laws too. And you're like, I'm good. I pay attention to the laws. I do the right thing. Shoo-shoo. Now, someone whom is naturally an average person, we'll say, but due to an imbalance could now be using their definitions too much or backwards. For example, using the aforementioned example, the imbalanced person is now extremely pushy about the law, or they are emotionally creating their own laws and facts. As well as they are now functionally applying these nonsense laws on themselves as well as others, as if they are true existent laws. Like so you've seen people who are, they're not just, oh, you have to pay attention to the law, you have to do the right thing, sticklers for it. They will actually sit there and say, no, I'm not going anywhere until you do exactly what you're supposed to do according to the law. Regardless of if you know, they're in charge or not, they just make that decision to do that. Another example of that is also people, you might know people yourself, I know I do, that they state an opinion, but they state it as if it's the law, as if that's the rule. And you're like, no, that might be the rule in your world, okay, but not in the regular world with the rest of us. But they will state it as if it is a law. It's just an opinion. You know people like that, don't you? Yes, I know, right? Okay, before I go any further, let me include this. The brain being balanced is important. The brain being imbalanced is just as important. The two sides working continuously and constantly back and forth is balanced. The two sides working balanced, but with disruptions, hiccups, is imbalanced. The hiccups and disruptions enable our brain to temporarily work differently. See, your brain is set a certain way, and if it always works that same way without any disruptions or anything, you'll always do things the way that it makes sense to you and never question beyond, never do something differently. The reason you can do something differently is because of the imbalance. I should say sometimes because of the imbalance. You know, like you've known people who are very, I don't want to say rigid, but you know, they're set in their ways. This is what I do. This is how I do it. I don't try new things. I don't do new things. And yet you can get them to try new things, but only if it makes sense. But if you have an imbalance, that can also cause it. For example, just like a quick one, somebody doesn't ride roller coasters, but the person that maybe they are interested in wants them to ride a roller coaster. That is an imbalance, because feelings for someone can be, you know, can cause us to do things we wouldn't normally do, right? We've all heard that kind of phrasing. Yes, that's what that means. It can work in a positive and a negative way. Hang on, I'll probably say that actually. So it enables us to make different decisions than what we would normally make. The imbalance enables us to step out of our comfort zones to see what life is like on the other side or through someone else's eyes. The imbalance is random. It happens anytime there is a disruption to our thinking. Although the imbalance itself is neither positive nor negative, or negative. I did it again. It's not even written that way. Sorry. It's neither positive or negative. It can have positive and or negative effects. The imbalance can also be very helpful as long as it resets and the brain bounces again. So there's a difference between a stuck imbalance and just a regular imbalance. A regular imbalance is going to happen and then it's going to reset. Your brain will go back to being balanced again and working the way it normally does. Now, a stuck imbalance, it doesn't go back. It doesn't go back to working the way it was supposed to. Now, examples of events that could imbalance a person: road rage, or even someone saying hello to you. Yes, even that could imbalance you. Because how many times have you said hello to someone and they went, "Oh, hi"? It caught them off guard, right? That's an imbalance. For a moment there, the mind is like, "What? Huh? How it?" Okay, think of life as being like a line. And every time that you deviate from that line, it is an imbalance. If a cat meows, you look up. This interruption is, small as it is, a change or deviation from the line. At this point, your brain needs to make a decision. Do you further react or do you ignore? This decision is made using the definitions in your brain. Fact, or the functional side, you like cats. Emotionally, you want to pet the cat. You want to do that. Functionally, you are allergic to cats. That's a fact. That will equal you will ignore or possibly move away. The fact that you like cats and the fact that you are allergic to cats versus the emotional you want to pet the cat. So, let me see. Sorry. The last bit is decided by how allergic you are, or if the cat is moving towards you, or if you are an emotionally minded person, the want to pet the cat may be stronger than the need to stay away from it. Sorry, I know I worded that kind of funny. I apologize. We've all known people who knew better than to do something, but they just couldn't help themselves, or it looked like a good idea at the time. So, please also note, I mentioned the first fact in that scenario was you like cats. The second fact was you are allergic to cats. Notice how they are both facts, but whereas the first one is a nice fact, the other one is the better, stronger fact, functionally speaking, because it deals with the safety and security and survival of that person because of being allergic. Although there are people out there that are allergic and will still go and pet the cat because the emotional side, whether it's because they're naturally more emotionally stronger or because they are imbalanced at that moment for some reason, who knows, the want to pet the cat is going to win over the fact that they're allergic. It also depends upon what level they're allergic to. Let's see here. A temporary imbalance can and usually rights itself in time, such as when something comes along that makes sense and feels good. For example, road rage. It happens now. Now you're imbalanced. You get to work and complain to a coworker. The coworker shares one of their road rage stories and suddenly everything is better. This is because it makes sense to find out that we are not only the one to suffer that kind of injustice, as well as it feels good that things make sense again. We're not alone. It's that kind of thinking. A stuck imbalance can right itself, but usually it has to be fixed. So sometimes trauma, which can be bad or good, see trauma, which we'll talk about, it happens and like a thorn, it gets stuck in the brain. There are times when we consciously or subconsciously find answers. An example of this is when you suddenly experience a moment of clarity out of the clear blue. Sometimes we are aware of what our brain suddenly realized, where we'll go, oh, you know what I just realized? One of those kind of moments. And sometimes we are not aware of it, where we just kind of sit there and we just kind of have this feeling like something cleared up. We have no clue what it was, but it's a feeling. There it is. The other stuck imbalance, if it is fixable, is usually fixed with therapy. So I don't go too much into that because I'm not a therapist. I'm not a doctor. I'm not anybody. I'm a nobody. Don't ask how I came up with this. Okay, so trauma to the brain, be it physical or mental, can change the definitions and or the way we use them. The difficulty about trauma is because not all trauma to the brain is what we consider to be traumatic. For example, a child raised with an abusive upbringing will most likely be imbalanced by that trauma, but a child raised with a loving upbringing can also produce an imbalanced person. A child whom does not understand the emotional value of love may eventually learn to put only a functional value on it. Now, whereas a functional value can be helpful, for example, like in hospitals, they ask and even have posters that show expressions that are denoting how much pain you're in on a scale of 1 to 10. If you do not have the proper mixture of though from both sides, from the two sides, the equals is wrong. I probably worded that wrong too. I apologize. Again, this is a rough draft. What do you want for nothing? I will now give you more definitions to the definitions that are listed above. The crystal ball. I said that in there, didn't I? I don't think I said that in one of the definitions, now that I'm realizing it. Oh well. It's a crystal ball. It's on the emotional side. And it's the imagination creates what-if scenarios in order to assist the functionals need to know what to expect. And seeing is believing. The brain can then attach to the possibility and then act upon it. Note, the stronger the functional side, naturally or imbalanced, the weaker the crystal ball is and or its effects. So the imagination is on the emotional side. It's the usual definition that everybody has, except the stronger the emotional side, then the stronger the ability is to create in never before seen ways. Example, to see things that do not exist, to create or invent things that do not already have functionality to them, such as a fact or a definition. Meaning, some people, okay, there's a difference between using your imagination functionally and using it emotionally. When functionally is a fact, a car exists. That is a fact. So if you imagine a car, you are functionally using your imagination, seeing something that already exists. Now, if you're seeing a car in, I can't say a color that you've never seen before, because tell me a color that no one's ever seen before. Seriously, we've got them all, right? But if you somehow, I don't know, put shark tails on the car, that's not something that's never happened before. I know people have done that. They just had that in the Lego show the other day, actually. Wow, they've got a lot of games out there that have different ways of making cars. Cotton candy wheels, I don't know. Something that you've never seen before. That's using your imagination emotionally. Even though functionally you've seen the cotton candy before. So functionally you've seen the car and you've seen the cotton candy. Those are both facts. But putting the two of them together is emotional because that's never before seen. Get it? A little bit? Maybe. Maybe not. Just an idea. I used to use a superhero thing, but I didn't want to go into a whole thing I mean, could you imagine, could you create a superhero that's never existed before and give it powers that no one's ever seen before? No, kind of tough. They've got a lot of them out there already. Okay, the what is, that is functional. It enables us to see or focus on our what is right here, right now, this second, current functional. I don't believe how this goes into play. Only the current functional situation. So what is right here, this second, that just, by the way, changed to the next second, to the next second, the next second. Okay, but right there in that 1 second, that is what the brain is seeing right then and there. That's it. The next second, things could change. Maybe it stays the same. Doesn't matter. It's not about beyond, and it's not even about past, even though that's technically a fact too, because it happened. Right. This second right here, right now. This is our what is right here, right now. Even in the time it took me to say that, we've had several of those seconds, but it's all about the what is right here in this very moment. The survival mode, it's functional. It enables us to focus more on need and or what we need, which then lessens the emotional want, but does not weaken the what if. In this mode, we typically pull people, things, and ideas to ourselves in order to oversee and or protect those things. It's not the greatest definition. And in fact, the next one is the over survival, and I even said in my notes here that I should fix or rewrite this. So an over survival is, it causes us to have an over focus, an on me only type selfish type focus on what is needed. The more over survival, the more you're over functionalizing, the more you put into an over survival mode, the more you are focused in on you and you only. And you may even have a family, but it gets to that point where you become just focused on you. This is what kind of gives people the ability to commit suicide. You know, you hear about people who do that and someone says, well, they had kids. Didn't they think their kids would care? That doesn't matter at that point. When the brain is in this mode, that's how it can happen. It's not about anybody else. It's not about what opportunities that person had. It's not about who loves them, who doesn't. Nothing else but that one. Remember how I said numbers is on the functional side? It's all about number one. The more functional, the more those definitions become stronger. Now, if they're naturally stronger that way, they're meant to be that way. So their brain is actually okay, and it's not, so they're not, they'll seem like a kind of more selfish person, but that's just because that's just the way their brain sees things. It's not because they're being a rude, selfish, mean person. It's people automatically think, well, that person, a lot of people actually are labeled as being narcissistic because they're like that. Well, there's actually a reason that this happens, and I can explain that in a future publication if I make any. But it's basically an over-functionalizing that's happening. They're becoming very, it's all about me, it's right here, it's right now. Most likely they probably started out on the emotional side, but they're kind of being twisted to a side that they are not. And that's what's causing such an issue. There's a lot of people that are like, ooh, narcissistic people are, ooh. Well, it's because it's almost like they're using the one side more than the other side, and it's the opposite of whom they really are. Whew. I'll go into it more later if I make another publication or whatever. Anyway, the roll with it. So it's emotional. It enables us, like acceptance, to, regardless of things making sense, to accept and roll with it. So we're in situations that are like, I don't know what to do. This doesn't make sense. Well, our roll with it enables us to roll away from it. To roll with the situation or roll away from the situation. Even though we might feel like we should stay attached to it, it's just not making sense. It's the survival mode saying, we need to survive this second here, so let's get away from this. Otherwise, we could get hurt. We could get into a depression. We could get into, there's different things to look at there. But the idea is that you can roll with it. Accept the situation, get away from the situation, whatever. So regardless of things making sense, you accept the roll with it. This includes rolling away from situations that are confusing, hurtful, and or nonsense. This is typically a healthy detachment because it's not forced. Whereas detachment is functional. It enables us to separate from situations that do not make sense and or could be harmful. Whereas detaching is not necessarily a negative. It does at times involve force, especially during an imbalance. I just had to explain this to the doctor inside. She didn't really listen. It's okay though. Her brain is looking at me through a textbook filter. I went to school, this is what I learned, and so I'm going to look at you using that filter. My textbook says that you fall in this line, and in this line, and in this line. And so that's how I'm going to look at you. I'm not going to really listen to you. I'm going to hear you, because that's important, but I'm not really going to listen to you. It's okay though, I understand. Because authority, functionally speaking, am I a doctor? No. So then why should she listen to me as if I am? Get it? No, okay, good. Get it, good. Okay, the following are not official definitions for the two sides. However, I do believe that they are important functions in the brain, and so they should at least be mentioned in summary. Yes, there's more information on this, people. Depression. Sometimes life happens, but there is no pause button. The brain creates or uses depression like a pause button. This is why you feel or act paused, slow motion, like it comes in two forms, the emotional and the functional. All people, regardless of what side they are stronger on, alternate between emotional and functional depression. So, laying in bed and crying is the emotional. Getting a shower and going to work, which is a need and a need, are both functional. The reason the person is still considered depressed is because the brain still feels, acts paused. I don't think I need to add that part. Oh well. Anyway, so depression can also be caused by other sources. For example, foreign materials in the body like allergens. It's something that doesn't make sense to the brain. If it's not recognized, or certain medications. This is this is also because it's a stranger to your brain. These allergens, these certain medications, certain things, they're a stranger to your brain, and so it doesn't make sense. And unless it can make sense of it, it will continue being a stranger. Some things our brain can make sense of. There could be different reasons for this. Like, for example, if you used if you used rose petals in aspirin, I don't know, your brain could recognize that teeny tiny little bit of that rose petal in there and possibly accept aspirin for that reason. That's just an example. That's a simple, silly example, actually. I just came up with it, so don't pay any attention to it. I can tell you right now that was an emotional answer and not a functional one. Yes, there is a difference, and I can explain more